Good morning, everybody. I hope everybody had a nice weekend. We're going to get started with a roll call. Let me just go down, if you can say present. Commissioner Byrne.
Present.
Commissioner Sheffer.
Present.
Commissioner Gay.
Present.
Commissioner Schlosser.
Here.
Commissioner Cluzy.
Present.
Commissioner Szymanski.
Present.
Okay, great. And obviously I am here. Good morning, everybody. Just a couple things before we get started. One of the gentleman, Mr. Durrell, who put in the petition about a one-way street on Felton Street in the city, which is on new business B, is not able to attend this meeting. And in addition, obviously, as you can see by our correspondence, we have a number of people that have corresponded about the possibility of putting in a one-way street. So I would like to say that I would like to suggest that we postpone this discussion until first Mr. Durrell can be part of it, because he is the one that brought it to the chief a couple weeks ago, but also till we can take it to further discussion from the commissioners from a big picture perspective, because obviously a couple of the correspondents mentioned, you know, not only Felton Street, but maybe there's some more things that we can think about in various different places around the city. And I think it becomes a bigger item and more of something that conceivably could be put off to the comprehensive development plan, or at least, if nothing else, to the possibility of us hiring an outside consultant or an urban planner to make more plans on things like one-way streets, because we've had a number of different people point these issues out, as well as stop signs. So what I would like to do is postpone new business B for a future date. Anybody with any questions? Commissioner
Yeah,
Byrne.
Mayor, and I think you implied this in your comment. I certainly support putting it off until we can have the broader discussion with all of the pertinent parties present. One of the letters that we just received within the last 24 hours, I think, ended up making a very good point, and that is to think more holistically, not just about one-way streets and stop signs, but importantly about helping to make our city more pedestrian and bicycle friendly. And hopefully those are items that will be going in to the comprehensive development plan. But I think we can't forget that as we have this broader discussion.
I agree. Commissioner Gay.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think we need to look at it holistically. And in fact, if we're going to incorporate in that the bicycle and pedestrian plan, then I think the Streets and Transportation Committee ought to be involved with it too. And I know we haven't started having meetings again yet, but I was going to ask a process question about this. You talk about bringing it back to a later meeting, but also doing a great deal of additional study and even incorporating it into the CDP. So would we not discuss it then among us and have his presentation or discuss the petition at all until all of that other study is done, or what?
Well, you know, my thought is, obviously, since the petition came in, we've had a number of different correspondence,
Right.
people, either a couple for it, many against it, and then a couple, as Commissioner Byrne just mentioned, like, hey, to look at it from a big picture perspective. So I think this is something that, you know, we could bring back to a commissioner's workshop to discuss and maybe task somebody like the Streets and Transportation, or task the city manager to look into bringing in an outside consultant. But I think speaking specifically on this item, I think needs to be put off.
Right, definitely. One of the things I wonder, though, is if we do bring it back, I'd like to see all that correspondence. You know, the correspondence seems to get just relegated to the correspondence section of that one agenda. So if we put off the discussion and we have it at another time, I'd like for those people not to have to write again, that we would bring all of that information that they brought into the discussion at that time.
Yes, and I will ask Ann to segregate that information so that we can bring it back for
That'd be great.
a specific meeting at some future date.
Okay. Thanks.
Any other questions, comments? If not, we'll move on to the city manager's report, please.
Thank you, Mayor. Good morning, commissioners. On July 1st, last week, the city prepared and submitted to the COVID CARES Act an expense reimbursement for personnel, supplies, service, and equipment dating back to the beginning of the coronavirus outbreak in March of this year. Total expenses are approximately $245,000 that were submitted. We should hear soon, and I'll keep you apprised of that.
Great.
Lake Avenue Streetscape improvements, the bid information was advertised on June 9th. A pre-bid meeting will be held tomorrow, July 6th, July 7th at 10:30 a.m. and bids will be opened on Tuesday, July 28th at 2 p.m. As you know, the City of Rehoboth Beach Commissioners unanimously voted in favor of requiring face coverings at all times in the city and public areas. And this was codified in a second modification to the Mayor's Proclamation of Civil Emergency and Order. Includes all persons within the City of Rehoboth Beach mandating face coverings in all public spaces. The Wayfinding Project, all foundations for the vehicular signs were completed last week, and this week work will begin on the additional foundations needed for the remaining bicycle and pedestrian signs. The first set of signs are expected to be shipped on July 10th and will arrive hopefully here in the city on July 13th. The installation contractor will begin installing the signs on July 14th with a targeted completion date of August 7th. The city has agreed to provide Hilton Displays with an additional 21-day extension on top of the already approved 30-day extension. These extensions were granted because of COVID-related complications, including office closures, raw material order, delivery, and shipment delays, and to account for safe install practices during the busy season. The commissioners of Rehoboth Beach approved each candidate's qualifications as prescribed by the city charter at the regular meeting on June 19th. Incumbent Mayor Paul Coons and Stan Mills are running for mayor. 2 residents and 2 non-residents are approved for 2 commissioner seats in the 2020 race. The 2 resident candidates are Jay Legree and Rachel Macha. Hugh Fuller and Patrick Gossett are the 2 non-resident candidates. On July 8th, Wednesday, 11 a.m., Chamber of Commerce Virtual Candidates Forum will be held, and July 18th, 11 a.m., Camp Rehoboth and Rehoboth Beach Homeowners Association will hold a candidates forum on Facebook, and that will be a live forum. Information regarding this is on the city's website.
I have a
Thank
quick
you.
question, Paul. Just before.
Commissioner Schlosser has a question. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I kind of couldn't hear it, Sharon. Or were you addressing the pedestrian crosswalk signal lights when you said that's delayed? And if not, would you mind giving us an update of where that is? I thought we got some money from the state for that as well. And if it was, you already addressed it. I didn't catch that. That's what it was.
No, I did not address that. I was talking about the Wayfinding Project.
Okay.
The Merge Wayfinding Project. The pedestrian crosswalks were deferred due to the budget constraints, so they are not happening this summer.
So I thought we got a grant for those, for the signals, for the signals
No.
lights.
No, we did not. No.
Okay.
At what
Can you hear
point? At what point would it be useful to revisit some of the things in the capital?
Yeah, that was my next question. So, but go ahead.
You know, I recommend looking at the end of July reports, seeing where we are. I'll update you on that. As you know, we're not really close to our projected revenue at this point in time. The Lake Avenue Streetscape project was the only one that we were moving forward with until September, when we can see where we are, because Lake Avenue, of course, we're sitting on almost $1 million from the state.
Well,
How about it?
and the canal dock proceeds for the same reason. But I guess I just wondered if you'd be comfortable revisiting, or at least looking at it after the end of July numbers come in?
Well, again, not comfortable revisiting necessarily, but at least looking at where we are at the end, when we have the July numbers, and then we have a remaining 6 weeks incorporated in the rest of the season, unless, you decide to move in another way with that.
So maybe we put on for the August workshop, a city manager update of the CIP and the city budget.
Sure.
Based on July numbers. All right, we'll put that on the August workshop for that.
Hey, Paul, can we also address what we're doing in the city? Because I noticed we're still backfilling employees, things like that, which I don't know if I have a concern with or not, but I don't want to just address the CIP. I'd like to look at kind of the whole budget and what we're doing to kind of keep expenses down holistically, not just for CIP projects, as part of that presentation.
No, and that's what I said. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I may have mumbled. It's an update of the CIP and the city budget overall.
Okay, that's fine, Paul. Thank you. You did say that. I just want to underscore that. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you. That's it. City Solicitor, anything?
Good morning, Mr. Mayor. Just everybody is aware, I think, that the suit was filed by the Knights of Columbus against the city of Rehoboth Beach, based upon the press and the activities that have happened over the past couple of years. Just so you are aware that we're seeking an extension to that. Normally you have 20 days, but because the insurance company is covering that, we recently got counsel called. Counsel will be Dan Griffith with Whiteford, Taylor, and also Max Walton, who you all know will be involved on behalf of the individual defendants. The mayor and the city manager were brought into litigation in their individual capacity. So there'll be 2 attorneys representing the city in addition to me, with the insurance carrier involved. We will answer that probably in the next 20 to 30 days. Then I'll lay out the whole lengthy process of getting through that litigation until it gets moving. But for now, we're just in the very early phases of answering it. So I just want to let everybody know that that's proceeding. Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you, Glenn. All right, we're going to move right into old business, A, which is further discussion of the adopted changes to gross floor area ordinance as edited by City Solicitor Mandalas based on feedback from commissioners. And just a reminder, on this issue, we do have a public hearing at our regular meeting this month. And if you look in your package, the solicitor has updated from our most recent discussion the amendment to this ordinance 270-4 relating to gross floor area. And if you remember last time, we basically cut out most of everything that was in the previous amendments to go just to the situation of revising the definition of gross floor area by clarifying that exterior walls are walls that enclose indoor space. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Glenn for discussion.
That's really fair. We have pretty much boiled it down to a very simple, I think, addition of a phrase that would clarify what an exterior wall is. So the definition of gross floor area now would define an exterior wall as a wall, which are walls that enclose indoor space. So this really boils it down to the essence of how the discussion started many months ago as to defining an exterior wall.
Yep. And to reiterate what we discussed before, it was what we came up with here is because we wanted to bring back what had been the case prior to building inspector's interpretation of gross floor area based upon structure, based upon walls, exterior walls. And so this was to hopefully remedy the situation that created nonconformity by many residential situations, that all of a sudden a railing was an exterior wall, and therefore that whatever was inside the railing was part of gross floor area. Am I stating that right, Glenn?
Exactly right, yes.
Commissioner Gay, you had a question.
Yes, first of all, I am focusing today on just residential, and I guess I'll have a question about that later, because with the definition, it would seem to apply to everything. And there are at least 3 places in the code where I think we would have to strike something that's there because it doesn't match the definition. But before I get to that, I also want to say I had asked Glenn this question over email a few days ago about indoor space and whether that was, I assumed it was meant to be indoor living space, thus the enclosed. And I asked the question about temperature controlled, and he said, well, not necessarily, because he reminded me that in our code we have that storage sheds and garages are counted within gross floor area. And of course, those do have walls. But I immediately started thinking about a 2-story porch that someone might build on the back of their house, which would be allowed under the new language. And we allow porches to be enclosed either by screens or by windows, or whatever. So someone could have a 2-story porch, and it would definitely be living space. It could be dining space. It could be sleeping space. It could be music. It could be hanging out. It could be whatever. That would not count as gross floor area, but the building where they store their bicycles and lawnmower would. That doesn't seem right to me.
Any thoughts on that, Glenn?
Well, look, I mean, I think it's more comes down to how the building official is going to interpret interior indoor space based upon this definition. So, I mean, I sort of had the same questions that Commissioner Gay has. I mean, there are a lot of spaces that arguably do have extra walls or are that are used for living that probably should be included in gross floor area. So I think it really comes down to is how is this going to be interpreted going forward from the building official. And I have not, unfortunately, had an opportunity to speak with Matt or Dom about this language and how it would function in their day-to-day review of plans. But I mean, it's a good question. A second floor porch that's not temperature controlled, screened in, is that included within gross floor area? I mean, I tend to, I tend to think that it should be. I don't know if this definition gets it there.
I mean, I guess the other thing I had wondered about in terms of ambiguity is that we do allow for windows to be installed in porches and not count against you in gross floor area, but yet could somebody in the future interpret, I mean, a window can make a wall, right? You put windows on all the sides. Is a window wall a wall? I don't know. Yeah. So that's another thing. I actually, I didn't know that Matt and Dom were going to be here today. I did talk to Matt on the phone a few weeks ago because I went over with him the other places in the code, and I assume we would have to do this all as part of the ordinance before it goes to public hearing, to basically strike the things that are now meaningless because of the definition. For instance, the 250 square foot incentive for front porches, that would come out because any size, no size counts. Commercial still says building or structures. So if we're going to take out structures and the definition is going to apply to both residential and commercial, well, then that has to come out. And I guess the problem I have with it overall is we were trying to make sure that we're allowing decks in residential. That's how this got started, because that went away last September with the interpretation. And we've been trying to get back there. And I don't think we're back there. I think we've gone much further than that. And I don't understand. I mean, it's obviously, I can see now why the confusion happened last fall, because we've talked about it in multiple meetings and we still can't fix it. But if it's simply a matter of making sure that we allow decks on residential, then why don't we just say that?
Okay, Commissioner Schlosser.
Yeah, I just have to say, I'm sorry to have to say this publicly, Glenn, but, you know, and Sharon, quite frankly, why don't the four, you two with the building inspectors, just sit down and come up with language that meets the intent of why we started this in the first place? This has been going on now since September, October timeframe. All we're trying to do, as Susan Gay said, is restore what has been done for 20 years. Or whatever. I think somebody told me 20, I don't know. Why can't the four of you just sit down and say, what is the language needed here, Dom and whoever else is on the building inspector team, to make sure we go back to the way this has been interpreted for decades? I know the code stinks. I know there's secondary effects, but you know, the fact that we haven't sat down and got this resolved and got an answer from our building inspectors at this point, it's just, I'm sorry, I'm frustrated. This is unacceptable. We should be at a place where they look at the language and say, this is how we're going to interpret it the way we've always interpreted it. I don't know why this is so complicated at this point when we've narrowed down what our intent is. Glenn, please answer this. Sharon, answer this. I don't understand why, you know, that we can't just sit down and get language that works, that they haven't been taught, that they haven't given their input at this point.
Well, I think the reason that we haven't gotten the perfect language is because we'll never get perfect language, quite frankly. Every single project is different, and the amount of creativity that our developers come up with different, you know, different porches and the way that, you know, new residential structures and commercial structures are put together. I don't think there is a code definition that's going to address every circumstance, and that's why the building official's job is difficult, because they every day are tested over how they interpret what is written in the code. I frankly think that the definition that we have right now gives enough clarity as to what is supposed to be included, but while still giving them some flexibility to say this should be included. Maybe the definition isn't perfect, but it should be included. But very honestly, I don't think you will ever get a definition that a building official will look at every set of plans and be able to say, here's the plan, here's the definition, it's black and white, I'm done. I really think that it's more about making sure the building officials know that, you know, where you are. You don't want decks around pools to be included in gross floor area, I think. This definition, I don't think any way anybody would interpret this definition as including those sorts of spaces. But as Commissioner Gay just pointed out, there are still some gray areas that require a building to say, what is the intent of this code, and should this in gross floor area? I'm sorry, there's not a perfect definition, but I really don't think there is.
Glenn, I appreciate that. That's very helpful. So Sharon, and I want to hear from Sharon, not necessarily the building inspectors on this. So is there a policy document for implementation of this regulation, or can you just do an internal policy memorandum that say this ordinance, here's how we're going to interpret this ordinance, going back to what the original intent here is, just to let residents have the same interpretation that they've had for years. Is there some way we can do the ordinance with this definition that's in there, and then I don't even know if we have a policy document that implements that the building inspectors follow. I don't think we do. But will you make this work so that it meets our intent if this is the language we put into the ordinance?
So let me just say there is no policy document. I think each building official, as you've seen, interprets it the way that they feel fit to do. The problem also is that over the years, potentially there are different commissioners, and different commissioners feel as though the interpretation and the language in the ordinance should be different. So I think that's why part of the reason we've been struggling here, because this is, I don't know if it's the first time, but it's the first time in my tenure here where this has been questioned by different commissioners. So in the past, it worked with what was happening with the the previous elected officials. So that's why I think it also, throws a monkey wrench into the whole process. We hear what you're saying. We want to craft the ordinance with your advisement, but you have different opinions from different commissioners.
We don't have different opinions. We all want the same thing, and that is just to go back. This is just what I heard. Everybody can jump in. All we want to do is restore the rights that homeowners had relative to GFA for non-indoor space and the definition of the exterior wall to be what it's been for 20 years. I mean, that's all we want. The building inspectors were interpreting this a certain way. All of a sudden, a change occurred at the Board of Adjustments. All we're saying is we want to go back to that. Other people can jump in, but that's, I think, what the consensus view
I don't
is.
understand why we can't just say that's what elements are, because I do think this language introduces even more ambiguities and contradictions. Not only that, I think it allows for much more than we think it allows for. It allows for 1,000 square feet of additional porch or deck space because it's counted differently from the way they count it today. So, it was interesting in that earlier discussion about the street, you were talking about bringing in a planner. Well, here's a situation where we could really use some expert advice. I think that's been part of the problem with all of us, frankly. We're not experts.
Right.
We're not experts, and we need experts in this.
Well, but I also
Keep
think that
delaying
the city
this.
solicitor is hearing what you're saying, and the solicitor has crafted the ordinance with,
Based on, yeah.
preciseness based on what you're asking for. And then there's a
You know what?
disagreement.
So one option maybe, because this idea of a policy directive that Commissioner Fleischer was talking about, maybe we could beef up the whereas clauses. So there's a legislative history to this new ordinance where the whereas clause explain what happened, how it went to a Board of Adjustment hearing, what the Board of Adjustment decided, how the legislative intent of the commissioners is to revert to the prior interpretation, which is that exterior spaces aren't included within gross. Nothing that has a knee wall that is open to the outside air was previously included within gross floor area. And, maybe if I could beef up those whereas clauses to give a better legislative intent and legislative history, that would then provide guidance to future building officials as to how to interpret this ordinance. Sometimes,
That's good with me, Glenn. I think if you lay out the intent, at least from my perspective, that's what we need to do. And to keep delaying this and taking away rights of homeowners, I can't believe somebody's not brought this up legally at this point, either a new builder or existing homeowner. Quite frankly, I just want to solve that problem. I love your idea, Glenn, of the whereas, and if we can get the Sharon's commitment that's how they're going to interpret it, the way it's always been interpreted, that answers my questions. But I'll stop now.
Whereas clauses are not part of the legislation, though.
They state the intent.
Yeah, I understand that. They're not part of it, but we also counted if a outside deck or a porch has been roofed, then that's interpreted as counting in the past. So if we're going to go back to that, there's a lot of the way they've interpreted it that's just not part of the new definition. It's just not. I think we have to accept that 1,000 square feet of extra decking and porches, screened and windowed porches. We have to accept that's what it allows.
You're painting a picture of 1,000 square feet, like every lot's going to be filled, to capacity here. And
No, not every lot, but it's what it allows. It's what it allows. When you adopt
Susan, wait a second. It doesn't cover. They still have to meet lot coverage. They still have to meet the other requirements so far, as they've always done. So you're painting a picture of there's going to be all of a sudden these massive lot covered.
No,
decks.
I'm not. The 1,000 square feet is within the current lot coverage. That's what I'm saying. I did the math before. I showed the pictures before, and that's what we need. We need a planner to show us, just like when the zoning ordinance was done 5 years ago, there was actually a drawing showing what it is now, what it was going to be, showing lot coverage. We need something like that. What I'm saying is it allows for within the lot coverage, it allows between 500 and 1,000 extra square feet of space. It just does, unless we make the language, the specific language that we wanted all along, which was decks. Because if it was all about decks, great, I'd love to restore it. The problem is that the building inspector had been interpreting, porches with roofs, they've been counting. So now all that goes away too. So it just opens everything up.
Well, Glenn,
Glenn,
is there a way to just limit it to the decks, if that's the case? I mean, I don't know.
I don't think it was limited to decks. I mean, I really think if you want to go back to what building officials were doing previously, you probably should say that in the whereas clauses and give a little bit of flexibility, because if you just say decks, then we have to do a very good definition of what a deck is. And I still feel as though there's going to be areas that are certainly not decks that there's going to be a question about if they get included or not. I thought that we got to a point where you all felt like it was indoor space you wanted to count as gross floor area. And that's why this limited definition addresses kind of just that. I mean, I would like to know, unfortunately, I wish I had this conversation, but I haven't. I would like to know how Matt feels about this definition and whether he feels as though, because he was doing residential previously, whether he feels as though this takes him back to where he was before the Board of Adjustment made the decision. Because that's what you really want. You want Matt to review residential plans the way he used to.
Yes.
All right. Is Matt with us? Can you comment on this?
No, sorry.
Okay.
Matt is not here.
But not just
Matt is
Matt,
not here today.
anybody who's going to do the inspections for residential property has to have the same interpretation.
Right.
Right.
And I did talk to Matt about this on the phone a few weeks ago, and that's why I wondered if we're really seriously thinking about taking this to public hearing, and frankly, I'm not sure it's ready yet, do we then need to go through to take out in the current code all the things that contradict, like the 250 square foot exclusion for porches? We just strike that. Do we strike out accessory structures? Do we strike out structures for commercial? I mean, what do we do to make the language consistent with the definition?
Well, again, the whole thing here is to go back to where we were. So if we magically just went back to where we were, what's the difference between that today? It's just the interpretation by the building inspector. No change of language, right?
Yeah.
We obviously, Glenn, tell me if I'm wrong. Basically, it's all interpretation, because previous to this discussion, back a year ago from now, the interpretation was you had 250 feet exempt and decks were not part of gross floor area.
Right.
Right?
Right. In residential. Right.
So what's the difference? Why even do anything? It really comes down to interpretation. That's what I see, is that all of a sudden, because the commercial situation came up and the Board of Adjustment, whatever it was, and the interpretation was a railing is a structure. If we just poof, railing is not a structure, but with no language, what's the difference from where we were?
I would agree with that. I think that the city solicitor has suggested changing the whereas clauses, and it does what you've said. It's all about the interpretation. So if we don't do anything with the code right now, because I think we all believe that we need professionals to rewrite the code, and we move forward with the whereas clause, and maybe, given that we're not doing any code change per se, do we even need a public hearing? Because this is all about interpretation.
Glenn, any thoughts from a legal perspective?
Well, I agree that it's all about interpretation. The reason that I tend to think that you need to address it somehow in the code, that the Board of Adjustment twice now has interpreted the current language in the code to basically say that railings and those sorts of things can be included, can be interpreted to be exterior walls, and therefore that sort of space can be included. So I feel as though after the board made not one but two determinations that the current code includes things like outdoor decks with, railings, I do feel as though there should be some clarification within the code. I don't think you're going to get a perfect interpretation or a perfect code language, because it does come down to a matter of interpretation. That's why I would like to have in the legislative history a more thoroughly developed set of whereas clauses, so that it's clear what the intent of the commission is. I do agree with Commissioner Gay that the exemption for 250 square feet on an open front porch creates ambiguity, because, and I always felt that way prior to the Board of Adjustment's decision. I felt that way because I always felt like it was an exemption from something that should already be exempt. My interpretation of the prior code language was that indoor space was what would be included within gross floor area. So I always struggled with, why would you get a 250 square foot exemption for an open front porch? Because I used to feel as though no part of an open front porch should be included because it's outdoor space. So I do think continues to be that element within the code that creates confusion if the 250 square foot exemption stays in. But it was in previously, and somehow it seemed to work.
Now, Glenn, didn't the Board of Adjustment not necessarily go along with the language, but the interpretation of the building inspector?
Mm-hmm.
Now, if the interpretation of the building inspector have been different, I don't think that the Board of Adjustment would have overturned it. I think they would have gone with the building inspector. Isn't that what happened in the case?
Well, maybe, Mayor. I guess the issue that I have with that is there were two interpretations put before the Board of Adjustment. One interpretation by the applicant or the appellant was that it should be interpreted that these outdoor spaces are not included within gross floor area. The building official's interpretation was that some of these outdoor areas that had some sort of structure that could be interpreted to be an exterior wall should be included. And the Board of Adjustment chose to go with the building official's interpretation. But my understanding from your lengthy discussions is that you, Board of Commissioners, would have went with the appellant's view of how to interpret that existing code language.
Well, I'm confused.
That's definitely what it seems.
Those Board of Adjustment cases were for commercial, right?
That's true. Yeah.
And in the code, it said commercial includes the buildings and the structures, whereas in residential, it didn't. That was part of the reason. And why it was ever made to be the same is a mystery to me, because that's why we're in this pickle, is because, but commercial was always buildings and structures. So by changing just the definition, no matter what you put in the whereas clauses about the intent for residential, it also allows all of those exterior structures in commercial to not be counted, correct?
So I agree with you that where the commercial portion says buildings, that definitely created some of the confusion. But you never get to that area. You never get to that area of the code until you read the definition of gross floor area. The definition of gross floor area applies to both residential and commercial. And exterior walls, that phrase appears in the definition of gross floor area. So I think that the Board of Adjustment's decision really came down to what should be interpreted as an exterior wall before you even get to the language that says buildings and structures. You have to deal with the exterior wall issue. So I hear you, Commissioner Gay, and I think that you're right. It is different. It's commercial, and the language is a little bit different for commercial when you get down to the definition of FAR. But if you start with the definition of gross floor area, and that's how the code progresses, is first gross floor area, then you have to get down lower to get to how do you define floor area. But exterior walls, that language appears in gross floor area. So when the board said that a railing is an exterior wall, at that point, because the definition of gross floor area isn't it's the same definition for both residential and commercial. Once the board said a railing can be an exterior wall, that's when residential got implicated and railings there had to be included.
Right.
I don't know how a railing in an exterior, I don't know how a railing in residential can be an exterior, or a railing in commercial can be an exterior wall, but a railing in residential can't be an exterior wall. So I think there has to be consistency.
Well, no, I guess I'm just asking, are structures in commercial then going to continue to be counted in FAR? Because the whole case with the, I mean, I put this in my examples a few months ago. We've had commercial applications come in that have 20,000 square feet in structures. Are those that now not going to be counted?
I mean, you raise a good question. I think that I think any structure, whether it's a building or not, if it's a structure that has indoor space, certainly that would be included. But structures such as pool decking around in a commercial development, I don't think balconies. Under this definition, it would not be included.
Or balconies. So the variance that the hotel in Baltimore sought for the balconies, about 8,000 square feet total, is now a gift, just the way it is, right? It's just a gift with this new definition.
I think under this definition, I think it's right that a balcony that isn't enclosed anyway,
right,
it's an outdoor, like a deck, would not be included under this definition. That's right.
So wasn't there a consensus among us that we want hotels to have balconies? So correct me if I'm wrong. Am I simplifying this too much? But I thought that was something that we desired.
They can have balconies now.
Well, but we were talking about, we didn't want them to build out without balconies in order to gain more interior space.
I think, Pat, I'm sorry, Pat, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, that's all right. I think the concern was that there were going to be hotels that would build without balconies, and that's what we don't. So
I think that's where we got.
Because frankly, Commissioner Gay, I think you're trying to solve for some problems that right now don't exist. And if we're getting code rewritten and we use the whereas clauses for now until the code can be rewritten.
Well, I think they do. I think they exist from day one. I mean, I think basically you've just created a situation in commercial where you have, tens of thousands of square feet that are now going to be allowed. Balconies have been allowed. We talked about this at the last meeting. I showed examples of several hotels with balconies allowed.
I understand what you're saying, but did you understand what I was saying?
Yeah, I know. I like balconies too. I would hope that a hotel would build them, like the ones that have already been built. I like them. It's a matter of maximizing. What's the maximum? I don't know. I mean, they want to build to the max and then add the balconies. That seems to be where we're going. So we're basically saying we're going to increase the bulk. If that's the intent, then let's say it.
Well, when you say increase the bulk, there's only so much you can do. First of all, you have height restrictions, you have lot coverage. So, explain to me, if you take a 50 by, this is probably not, you take a 50 by 100 lot and they build a hotel from lot line to lot line without balconies, that's not what we want. I mean, I understand there's the gross floor area, but at the same time, I think we don't want that to happen. And I don't think it's going to really add to the bulk if you have these balconies. You have this, you keep talking about this, it's going to be bulkier. Somebody, and it's probably the building official that could explain this better. But to me, if you're not going higher, there's only so much you can do in terms of the bulk.
Well, and in a hotel,
square footage.
In a hotel, you can only have 50% lot coverage. You can't cover any more than 50% of the lot. And what I've seen over the years is that a hotel built to 50% of the lot, whether it has balconies, doesn't have balconies, it's going to cover 50% of the lot. So really, to me, this comes down to more of are you incentivizing balconies or you're not incentivizing balconies? If you count them within gross floor area, then I think Commissioner Paluzzi is right. There's going to be some incentive to not do balconies, maximize interior space. If they're not included, then perhaps a developer will choose to include balconies as an embellishment that I don't know value wise whether they get more money out of a hotel room as a balcony or not. But I think that not including probably incentivizes some builders to say, I'll have balconies. So
And then there's a say, now I can't have a restaurant because I have a balcony, or there's a lot of things that go into it. But at the same time, I think that you're overthinking the whole commercial side of this.
We have examples that are on the drawing boards right now. I mean, so I'm not, I mean, this is real, you know, the additional 8,000 square feet for one hotel is real. And the other hotel applications that have come in have had similar amounts of structures.
So
I'm not imagining things. Those are on the table now.
You're imagining things. What I'm asking you is, there are these hotels, and I've looked at some of them. I haven't looked at them lately. But so you're basically have been against a lot of what they've been.
No, I'm not. No, I think they're trying to maximize and then have us add on. In other words, Board of Adjustment didn't grant them a variance. And so now we have to change the code to make it possible. I have a problem with that, because I don't think we're thinking through the implications. Again, the other hotels have been built in the last 10, 15 years and haven't had a problem with the code. But I guess I have one question, and I guess Dom's not here. Glenn, I don't know if you would know this or not, but on the lot coverage for hotels, a balcony is not at ground level. So would that not count anyway for lot coverage?
It counts. If you look at the footprint, look at it from an aerial view.
Oh, an aerial. Okay, because really, okay, because that's what I showed at one of the previous meetings. The math doesn't even allow it now. So this is like a false expectation, because if you maximize the interior space of a hotel with 50% lot coverage and a FAR of 2 with 4 floors, the math doesn't allow you to add anything. So we've created an impossible situation.
All right, we're getting off track here.
Yeah.
Glenn, getting back to what the intent of what our discussion is supposed to be, which is to have the residential properties realize where we had been before. You think that can be accomplished with the whereas?
I think that at least you can give the policy directive to any future building official as to how you expect this language to be interpreted within the whereas clauses, yes.
Now, if we were to do that, do we need to go to public hearing at the next meeting?
The whereas clauses don't change the actual language, as Commissioner Gay said, that will be codified. So the language that'll be codified has already been publicly introduced. It's with the meeting packet materials today. So I don't think that revising the whereas clauses would cause a delay in the public hearing. That's just something that I will work on between now and your public hearing date. But the language will stay the way it is. And, look, you all have, and I have struggled with what is the right language to use in this ordinance. And quite honestly, that's part of the reason that public hearing is to hear from some other people about maybe there is a better way of defining what you're trying to do. And maybe you'll hear that at the public hearing. But I think that, you've tossed this around so much that at some point you got to get it to a public hearing. And, you may hear things that make you say, we would never do this. This is a horrible ordinance. Or you might hear things that tweak it this much and you're going to have it. So, but I think that,
so we will continue with having the public hearing at the next meeting. If you could work on the whereas, that would be very helpful.
Right.
Obviously, with the public meeting, we may have public comments, like you say, that may bring us to a different realization. With that in mind, since no one has their hand up, I know someone is from the public is on here to discuss this specifically. What I'd like to do is bring on Vince Robertson for his comments, and I'm sure he'll be here during the public hearing as well. Vince, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mayor. Can everybody hear me okay?
right?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. After hearing the discussion this morning, and thanks for that background, I think I'll reserve my comments to the public hearing for the most part. Just a couple things, though, I want to kind of I think it's important for a little bit of context. It seems like this ordinance has almost come full circle in some degree. Now there's this conversation is that, we're going to try to fix the residential. Well, that's not how the conversation initially started. There was talk about the fact that it came out of 2 Board of Adjustment appeals that dealt with actually commercial. There were plenty of residential examples given, particularly in the case that I had, but that's because there hasn't been any real commercial activity in the city where the FAR had been applied, except for situations where substantial variances had previously been granted by the Board of Adjustment for FAR calculations. And I'm not going to go into the details on it. One of them was specifically a hotel on Wilmington Avenue. So there was a desire to sort of fix that, I thought, coming out of that Board of Adjustment action and the conversation of the mayor and commissioners initially, that we've got a problem here that's worth addressing and worth fixing. And it sort of, the residential part was a side issue of that, and that came out of, for example, what was placed on the city's website by the city building inspector. So there was more of a global issue than that. The other thing I'm a little bit surprised about is that we sort of dropped off the underground parking from the FAR. That doesn't affect me because we got a variance for that for my client's application, so it doesn't affect me particularly. But I think for the good of the city, that's important. And I thought that's where we started. That was kind of the one thing that everybody had consensus on, that the underground parking wouldn't count against the FAR, because you can't see it. We want to get parking off the streets, et cetera. So I would just ask you to consider bringing that back in, because that seemed like the one that was completely not controversial in all this. I'd ask you to just to consider those couple of things as you move forward with this, and I look forward to giving you a little bit more of a conversation when we have the public hearing. And thanks for your time and energy in all of this. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Glenn, given what Mr. Robertson just said about the underground parking, and given the fact that I think there was a consensus to move forward with that because the Board of Adjustment made that adjustment, or made that declaration, and that we were pretty much so on board with the fact that we want to promote off-street parking, and by counting off-street parking towards the gross floor area was kind of shooting it away from us. Is that something that the commissioners would like to see be put back into the language? Commissioner Caluzzi.
I would like to see that put back in the language. And Commissioner Schlosser, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it was your idea to take that out because you were just trying to simplify this whole situation and try to take care of the issues with the interpretation as they stood, and just go back to having the code interpreted the way it was. But you weren't against underground parking. Am I correct?
Thank you for asking, Commissioner Caluzzi. No, I'm not against that. It just, again, the communication regarding what we were trying to do here, just, it's been not very good, quite frankly. And I just wanted to go back to the simple thing that I believed in, at least. We had different building inspectors interpreting the same code differently. And we need to fix that for our residents. That's why. But yes, Commissioner Caluzzi, answer your question. I'm not against the underground parking being excluded, and it's a good thing, I think, for the city. Thank you for asking.
I think it is too. I mean, getting cars off the street, is important, and I think that that's something that ought to be put in for discussion at the public hearing. So I'm for putting that back in.
My recollection of why it came off before was that Glenn asked us some question. We were trying to define subterranean, and there was a definition in our code for underground. And so I guess I asked the question, did we mean for it to be underground? And Glenn said, well, how much underground? Do you want it all underground? Do you want it 2/3 underground? What's the definition? And that it was at that point that we took it off because we couldn't define what we meant by subterranean, and whether it was just 1 inch underground or how much of it had to be underground.
frankly, I'm not sure that makes a difference, and I would think
May not.
well, let me talk.
Yeah.
That for a hotel, since there's a height limitation, it's going to be to their benefit to go as far down underground as they can. However, there are some issues for people who are, or for builders who are close to the ocean, that they may not do that. So this gives them that opportunity of providing parking, but they may not be able to have the height that they want. So
All I'm saying is that we didn't have a definition, so I don't know whether we're leaving it open or what. I just don't know. But that's why I'm just explaining why we took it off. I'm all in favor of the underground parking. I've been from the beginning, but I was just explaining why we took it off.
Glenn, would you mind looking into that definition? I mean, I think, as Commissioner Calusi mentioned, I would think with the height limitations, any hotel builder is going to put it as deep as he can so he can go as high as he can within the limits, with the exception of certain situations near the water that they may be difficult. But if you could work on that, that would be helpful.
I can. I'm looking at the previous version now, which specifically exempted subsurface parking areas. So I'll look at that. I did make the comment that Commissioner Gay mentioned last time that the height limitation is probably going to drive how far underground the parking goes. But if the commissioners feel as though if any of the underground parking is visible, if you can see it from the street level, that for some reason it shouldn't be excluded, then I should know that. But my view and the way that I'll probably try to draft the language is that so long as it is at least partially underground, it'll be exempt from gross floor area.
Yeah, that's what I'd say. And subsurface versus subterranean seems good to me too. Commissioner Schlosser.
I just wanted to say we could probably spend the next 2 years talking, about this, and it's important to talk about it, but this code's been a mess for 20 years. And, it seems that we are committed to revising it. We put it in the budget. But, we also have to make incremental changes, to protect our residents. So I just think we need to go forward with something. We have consensus, it seems to me, to go forward with the whereas clauses. And, I think incremental progress is the way to keep us moving forward. I just want to make that statement. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Szymanowski.
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to say that I'm completely in favor of adding, again, the subterranean or subsurface parking. I think it's important. We all agree. So we absolutely should add that. And then I just want to make one clarification. Glenn, you said that you thought on the commercial side that those balconies, if they were part of, obviously balconies on the commercial side would be counted towards the lot coverage, but would not count as a structure when on this commercial side structure gets added to the GFA. But I just want to remind everyone that in the definition of structure, balconies, porches, decks is explicitly included.
Yeah, that's right.
That's right. But I think the distinction here is that we're talking about what gets counted for purposes of gross floor area. While it is a structure, because the definition of structure includes those types of things, it's certainly a structure, but because the new definition of gross floor area will say which are walls that enclose indoor space, a balcony that doesn't have indoor space or a deck that doesn't have indoor space, while they are structured, they won't get included. So I could see, for example, a gazebo, which is a structure if it was walled all the way around. I'm not sure if that even could be a gazebo, but if there was an out structure that had walls that enclose interior space, then that out structure would be included with gross floor area.
Thank you, Glenn. Commissioner Sheffer.
Yeah, I'm in support of subsurface parking. However, The language should be, I have no objection to being able to see any part of the cars. I think it's important just to get the vehicles off the street for parking purposes to the degree that we can.
Thank you. Commissioner Byrne.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to come back to where we've started and where we started many, many, many months ago. And that is trying to realize a fairness to our homeowners, our builders, our residents. Technically, right now, many of our residential properties are out of compliance. I don't think that's a good place for us to stay while we just continue to kind of spin the same discussion month after month after month. And it's clear that the intent is not to change the green space, not to change lot coverage, but to restore the status quo from where we are. So I just hope that we can get to the public hearing and move this ahead quickly on behalf of all the people out there that are not being treated well by all of this.
Well said.
Well
Thank
said,
you.
Ed.
So Glenn, I guess you can work on that as we move towards the public hearing next time around.
All right, I'll revise it and try to get something out this week to the commissioners.
All right. Thank you very much. If there's nothing else on this subject, we'll move on to new business A, which is discuss the potential change order to the Rehoboth Beach Wastewater Treatment Plant Phase 2A contract to include installation of a new mixer assembly. And we have Kevin Williams here to lead the charge. And I believe there's a bit of a presentation to be made, which will come up on your screen.
Great, thanks. Thanks, Mayor, and good morning, Commissioners. I spoke to you about 2 months ago when we were awarding the fabrication contract for the making of the mixers for Phase 3. At that time, we awarded it to Philadelphia Mixer out of Philadelphia. So now I'm here to talk to you about how we're going to get those installed on the wastewater treatment plant. So if you recall, the mixers in question, there's 4 sit atop the metal structure, and then there you can see a good picture on the right of the actual mixer assemblies themselves. If you recall, a year ago, we had one go bad. We had an emergency fix that we did last year during the peak season to keep the plant operational. And then last fall and over the winter, we procured and installed one to replace that one that had broken on us last year. You'll also recall that because of the sensitivity of these mixers and the impact they have on the plant, that we had decided at that time to split Phase 3 into 2 phases, 3A, and specifically address the mixers and mixer assemblies, and 3B, which would be the remainder of the old Phase 3, which was the dewatering facility and that operation. So I just wanted to bring you back to that. And what we're specifically talking about is the installation of those 3 new mixer assemblies and the sparge rig on the 4th. You'll also recall that the reason we did that was to be able to get these replaced in time for the next peak season. So next summer, next spring, these will be, the construction will be completed and they'll be in place in time for next year's peak season. There were some ancillary cost benefits to it as well, because we could share some expenses with the contractor already being here and being mobilized, Phase 2 work, and also some of the administrative savings with respect to having to put together a bid package, send it out to advertise and the like. So, but the big one was clearly in order to get us to be able to have these mixers replaced for the next peak season. Just want to touch briefly on our current arrangement for the Phase 2 contract with the county. You'll recall that originally it was a $6 million project, and the county was funding it as part of their project to upgrade their South Coastal treatment plant because of the similarity in the work. So our original agreement with the county was they were going to split the cost with us 50-50, which is a little bit better terms for us than our typical agreement with the county that was signed back in 2017. So the original $6 million was to be 50-50 split, and we would pay that back to them with 0% interest over the 10-year term once the project is complete. a year or so ago, we came back to you and asked if we could include some emergency structural improvements at the Headworks building as part of that phase 2 contract, just because we could not wait any longer to get some of that work done. The county pushed back a little bit, didn't want to use the same agreement on the funding stream. So we went back to the terms of the agreement at 58% city, 42 county, 2% interest, and again, would pay that back over a 10-year term at the completion of the work. Following that same philosophy, what we want to try to do is add the installation of these mixers into the phase 2 contract. There's a little description of the scope. It's those 3 mixer assemblies plus the structural decks that they sit on to reinforce those, because that's part of our problem up there. Our construction estimate is about little under $1.5 million to do that work. And in discussions with the county, they are receptive to, if we ask them to abide by the terms of the 2017 agreement, again, with the cost share being 58% city, 42 county, 2% interest and paid back during that same 10-year term. The one change would be our original plan had called for this to be funded out of the SRF funding loan that we got from the state, but in this case now we would be getting that money from the county. So our requested action that we'll ask you at the next meeting is, requested board action would be to approve a resolution that authorizes the mayor to go ahead and, similar to what we did in the phase 2 ad that we asked them to approve a resolution authorizing the mayor to ask the county to include that $1.5 million phase 3A work into the phase 2 contract. And we'll bring that, get you that draft resolution this week, so you have plenty of time to look at it before the requested vote on the 17th. And with that, I'll entertain any questions you might have.
Hey, Kevin, just real quick, this is all work. It's not new scope, right? It's just work that's already in your long-term projections. You're just kind of moving some things forward, given the state of disrepair from all these years of neglect, right?
You're absolutely correct. That's exactly what we're doing, pulling some things forward.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Kevin?
Yeah, this is Dick. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, Kevin, I'm assuming that there's a real downside to not approving this and not moving this work ahead.
So yes, sir. The downside is that if we don't bring this forward and do it as part of the phase 2 contract, then we have to really include it in the overall phase 3 contract. Whereas we can't have the 2 contractors on the same footprint at the plant. So it would then get pushed until the phase 3B design is completed and the phase 2 construction is completed. So it would cost us an entire peak season next year that we would still be operating on kind of the patchwork situation we have down there now. So it buys us a year of not having to work with those, the old motors and the mixers.
Right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner Byrne. Anybody else? If
I
not,
just want to say this is a really good briefing, Kevin. Thank you for taking the time to put this so succinctly and tee it up for our decision. So really good briefing. Thank you.
Certainly welcome.
Thank you very much, Kevin. And we'll move on to citizen comments. Looks like Rick Perry, please.
Good morning, Mayor and Commissioners. Just going to limit my comment to say that I do appreciate Glenn's suggestion of putting more legislative history where it can be easily found. One of the things that has always bothered me is that there doesn't seem to be enough legislative history that's readily available and clear when interpreting our ordinances. And whenever a court looks at a statute or something that Congress, for example, or a state legislature has passed, they do go back and look at the written legislative history to see what the intent of the adopting body was. And so while it is not a perfect solution, and I don't think totally solves the problem, it will, at least on an interim basis, be helpful. That's all I had to say. Thanks.
Thank you, Rick. Commissioner comments, anybody?
Yeah, I have one quick one. Just to get you up to date, the Environment Committee met via Zoom last week on July 1st, had a very good turnout, a lot of active participation. It was the first meeting they had, I believe, since February. And there were several things that they discussed. They spent a lot of time moving ahead on a proposal that will eventually come to us regarding a ban on single-use plastic products. And they are working with DENRIC, with other state agencies. I know there, over time, there's been discussion with the city manager and others in the city. They're working in collaboration with Main Street businesses, with Chamber of Commerce, and so on. So we will be hearing more about that. A second topic was on 5G. You will remember that Heather Metz made a proposal to us, or at least a presentation to us, I guess is the correct way to put it, a number of months ago. And so the Environment Committee is continuing to look at the situation for 5G within our city. There will be more information coming on that in the weeks and next couple of months. Thirdly, they are working to develop a climate action plan for the city of Rehoboth Beach. They are working closely with DENRIC, who is developing a statewide climate action plan. And I strongly encourage that what they do is really a spin-off of the state plan and trying to make meaning of the state plan as it applies to our unique environments within the city. And then they did touch base on a fourth topic, which they're calling an anti-idling policy for the city. And that has to do with particularly large vehicles who let their motors idle and therefore pollute the air and so on. And they're taking a look at that situation. So just a quick update.
Dick, can I ask you a couple questions about that? Sure. And maybe this is also a question for Glenn. You know, about 5 years ago, we passed an anti-idling. I actually thought it was an ordinance, and I realize now I think it was a resolution. So I guess I wonder does that not count for anything now, or what? Do we need to?
It's a good question. They are aware of it. The chair of the committee, Charlie Garlow, is aware of that. They have a sense that it's not being followed in any consistent way, and so therefore it doesn't have much meaning.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I could add that the resolution was more aspirational in nature, kind of setting the expectations that the commissioners have, whereas an ordinance would be something that's enforceable, and would have the full force and effect of law.
And is that what we would be moving toward then, Dick, would be to go from having the resolution to having an actual ordinance?
That's what they're investigating and taking a look at and talking to others as to if that makes good sense. Is it practical? Would it be helpful?
Right. And the other thing was, I did listen to part of it. Is the expectation that we will be revisiting our 5G ordinance to address some of the issues that Heather has brought up from other municipalities?
That's the intent of the Environment Committee, that they want to put something forward to us to take a look at. Do we know when that will be? I think it could be soon, particularly if Heather Metz has her way. She's very, very passionate about this topic, and they had good discussion, thorough discussion, and kind of went back to the drawing boards to fill in some of the blanks to strengthen the work that they've been doing. Okay, I look forward to that. Thank you.
Any other commissioner comments? If not, just for our future meetings, there's a meeting tomorrow at 3:00 for the COVID discussion, and then our next Commissioners' regular meeting would be on the 17th of this month at, I believe, 2 o'clock.
Yes.
We moved
Yeah.
meetings from 3 o'clock to 2 o'clock. So at 2 p.m. on Friday, the 17th would be our next regular meeting. If there's nothing else, this meeting's adjourned. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you.